Hello, my name is Vernon Atreides. This is Group 6. I'll be doing the presentation for our group, which includes myself, Rob Meek, as well as George Bailey. We're going to start off here on our dashboard, which has child mortality rates versus immunization, and that is what our topic is throughout. In developing countries, mortality rates are not only the measure of how a society presently is, but where progress has been made. Infant mortality rates are quite high in the developing world and in the developed world as well. Since 1999, with the creation of the Global Alliance of Vaccinations and Immunizations, or GAVI, a concerted effort to raise immunizations in poor countries started. Over the past few years, many of the developed countries, there has been an anti-vaccination sentiment and organized groups to oppose children being immunized. Unlike developed countries, according to Milton and Mercer's work in Cognitive Obstacles to Pro-Vaccination Beliefs in 2015, cultural attraction and epistemic vigilance interference with the delivery of vaccinations actually occurred in those developing countries. In the developed world, there tend to be a more complex defensive stance. Pluviona, in his work, Misinformation Lingers in Memory and Failure of 3 Pro-Vaccination Strategies in 2017, stated that this is called vaccine hesitancy. And it's rooted in a set of cognitive mechanisms that conspire to render misinformation particularly sticky and pro-vaccination beliefs counterintuitive. Combining his work with Bryden of 2015, it involves a multitude of emotional, social, and even magical, as well as cultural and political factors. And lastly, there's a public information set of campaigns designed to dispel erroneous vaccination beliefs that catch fire over social media platforms that often overlook these factors and have a limited or even unintended opposite effect. So regardless of the fact-based evidence to the contrary, this particular group is not swayed. Science has very little persuasive ability. The following storyboards illustrate how immunizations relate to childhood mortality in regards to developing or poor countries, and that to developed countries. So that's coming up. Here's our first board as it's slowly booting here. There it goes. Childhood immunization rates by country demonstrates a geolocation map with each individual countries. Oh, it still didn't come up. Let's see. There we go. And as you can see that we have countries. When you hover over the country, we get the name of the country, its location by latitude and longitude, and its median immunization rate. Right? And we have 2 dimensions over here to the right: vaccine type and country name. The vaccine type has 7 of the 10 recommended immunizations according to Ventola's work in 2016. That still holds true to today. And the WHO has a little 3 more. But what we have in our source is BCG, which is for tuberculosis. That's given within the first year of life, and that's consistent with the World Health Organization, or WHO. Underneath that, we have DPT, which is diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. That also is given within WHO's recommendation, 12 to 23 months. Under that, we have hepatitis B, which is consistent with that of BCG's recommendation by WHO. Under that is Haemophilus influenza, 12 to 23 months. Under that, measles, mumps, and rubella. It'll pop up. There it goes. And you get that within 9 to 12 months, or at least within that first year. And then lastly, of the 7, we have polio, also 1 year of age by WHO recommendations. Now, the Global Alliance of Vaccinations and Immunizations, for GAVI, delivers DPT, which is here, hepatitis B, and the HepB, all in 1 vaccine since 2001. And the data supports a continue to improve worldwide in these countries as well as developed countries. The countries that they are the GAVI ones are able to help them by increasing outside support and their eligibility for support. Now, the eligibility is on the gross national product per capita in a country, and it's based on the U.S., which is equal to like $1,580. Now, to get some perspective on really what that means, the U.S. GNP per capita is 60,200 as of 2017. Now, I'd also mention that there were 7 out of the 10. What's not here in this set is hepatitis A, influenza, and varicella, which is chickenpox vaccine. And all of those contribute to an increased child mortality rate. Unfortunately, we do not have that information in our data source. Now, to see the differences between the developed countries and non-developed countries, we would parse them out. And Australia, and we have 32 developed countries on that list. Belgium, please bear with me, this takes a little while, because it would not save as I would have loved it to. Canada, Cyprus, Czech Republic, and Denmark. There it is. Then we have Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Israel, Italy, come on, Italy, Japan, down, there it goes. Korea, that's South Korea. Luxembourg. See any that I missed? Hopefully not. Get that there. We have Netherlands, New Zealand. Where's Portugal? Portugal. Slovenia, almost there. Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, UK, and the US. So when you parse out these 32 developed countries, we get an average of their immunization of 93.5, which is a significant, we'll get to that in a short minute here. The significance right now is that the incidence, prevalence, morbidity, and mortality of many of the communicable diseases have been significantly decreased in Western countries, largely because of a national immunization strategy aimed at infants and children. And estimated that the U.S. birth cohort receiving recommended immunizations at 20 million illnesses and greater than 40,000 deaths are prevented, resulting in savings of about $70 billion. Vaccinations are effective primarily due to 2 factors. First, one person is immunized against a specific pathogen, the rate of that disease as well as the associated asymptomatic carrier state is also decreased. And secondly, when a large population is immunized, unvaccinated benefit from herd immunity, which is reduced risk of pathogen exposure to pathogens. And to reach herd immunity, you need to be upwards in 90 to 95% vaccination. And that's one of the reasons why I stressed out that these developed countries have an average of 93.5. So they more or less correspond to herd immunity. So apart from outbreaks similar to the measles that started in Disneyland in 2015, and most recently in New York City's Hasidic community, anti-vaccination trends appears to be grains of sand on a beach. Therefore, as a result of the availability of vaccinations, most vaccine-preventable diseases that have been health trends for centuries have experienced a dramatic decline in mortality and morbidity. Moving on to our next storyboard. The second storyboard reflects child mortality rates per 1,000 in reference to country and year. Similar to the first storyboard, we had chosen a geolocation map, as you can see here. And again, if you hover over a country, you get the name of the country, you get the average mortality per 100,000 and its location by latitude and longitude. Now, considering a possible decline secondary to anti-vaccination sentiment in developed countries, when we parsed out earlier, the years after the Gavi country. So, and this time, I'm not going to go through that again. But I'll point out a few countries. And what you can see, and I'll mention, like I said, just a few countries, have a very similar trend. If you go over to Canada, Canada started out at 15.7 and it steadily declined to 12.6 by 2017. The US was upwards of 17.3 and went down to 14.3. Spain, we get to Spain, that's Portugal. Oops, sorry about that. Well, Spain had, oh my, yeah, there we go. Spain was up at 17.6 down to 14.1. Jump over here to Iceland, was up at 11.1 down to 8.8. Turkey was 136 down to 100.9. And they're only pointing out just these few so you can get a general sense because they all have something very similar. UK, it was up at 17 down to 12.3. And it happens that all the developed countries have sustained and sequential drops every year for the past 5 years. So the Global Alliance of Vaccinations and Immunization was to improve vaccinations for the poorest countries in the world. Correct. The developed countries all have long-standing policies and strategies to implement immunization for public well-being. The above comparison to the developed countries to GAVI influence was not to show the effect or the influence, but how the developed countries fared with increasing anti-vaccination sentiment after GAVI was initiated. Two factors don't bear a relationship to each other. That being said, the data does not support the diversion from decreasing childhood immunization rate. Now, this is the mortality rates versus immunizations rates. And when you're comparing the countries, you see somewhat of a mirror image across this line here. Here's the immunizations, these are mortality rates. And there's something inversely related. In other words, the countries with the lower immunization rates tend to also have lower mortality rates. This is a well-perceived notion, and it's consistent with the data. Now, the GAVI countries demonstrate this pattern, but less consistently, presumably because there are so many other factors relative to the high childhood mortality rates. For example, if you go above the 200 line here, like right there, you got Burkina Faso at 216 at 70%. And that holds true if you go down this line. You'll see other countries like Guinea at 215 and 53, Liberia 217 at 65, Nigeria at 203 to 42 at the lowest there. Sierra Leone at 261 and 75.5. Immunization rates alone are poor indicators of child mortality in GAVI countries than in developed countries. Moving on to the next, and this is our last storyboard. Since 1980, the United States has been an improvement in mortality in children in 5 years. All right, so this is the childhood mortality rate versus immunization rate by year in the United States. Right? Since approximately 2000, improvements have been more modest, as would be expected as we get closer to zero. The average immunization rate in the country was highest in 2012, and it dropped slightly each year until a small improvement in 2017. Overall, rates have been rather flat since 2009. However, it is hard to assess the opposite effects of improving coverage through the ACA in 2010 and the anti-vaccination movement. What is clear is that irrespective of the vaccination rate, child mortality continues to improve. Again, recognizing that mortality rates are multifactorial, they may correlate well with immunization rates without being completely concordant. And that ends our discussion on childhood immunization and mortality rates. I appreciate your attendance, and good night.